Is Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the dynamic and youthful leader of Burkina Faso, steering his nation toward becoming an unexpected hub for nuclear capability? In a time marked by significant transformation, Burkina Faso is undergoing sweeping changes, from a restructured military force to a reoriented economic framework. Yet, of all the shifts taking place, the whispers of nuclear ambition have sent the greatest shockwaves, particularly through Western capitals. The idea of Burkina Faso even contemplating nuclear development was unthinkable to many in the West. And now that it's entering serious discourse, the alarm bells are ringing louder than ever. Why does Burkina Faso's strategic evolution so consistently spark concern among Western powers? The answer lies not in mere weapons, but in what such a transformation could mean for the global balance of power. There is growing unease among former colonial powers who fear losing their long-standing influence over African affairs. In boardrooms and foreign ministries across Europe and North America, discussions are likely already underway on how to delay, disrupt, or outright prevent Burkina Faso from following through with this new trajectory. The idea that a once overlooked country in West Africa could spark a chain reaction of empowerment across the continent is profoundly unsettling to those accustomed to a unipolar world. The fundamental question remains: can Western powers really stop Ibrahim Traoré? More importantly, will they risk the geopolitical backlash that might come from trying to? As the world watches, the stakes rise, and the narrative begins to shift. Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation that once rarely featured in global headlines, has now taken bold steps that few would have predicted. Under President Traoré's leadership, the creation of the Burkinabe Atomic Energy Agency is not just a bureaucratic act, it's a seismic move with global implications. This initiative sends a message to the world. Burkina Faso will no longer sit quietly on the sidelines of technological progress and global influence. It is no longer satisfied with being a passive participant in global affairs. Instead, it intends to be an innovator, a disruptor, and a sovereign actor. In a world where nuclear capacity has long been reserved for the elite club of superpowers, Burkina Faso's bold entry into this space is nothing short of revolutionary. The timing of this nuclear pursuit is deeply strategic. The global order is in flux, with traditional Western dominance facing increasing challenges from emergent powers like Russia and China. Political fragmentation, economic uncertainty, and shifting alliances are creating a rare opening. A window of opportunity for nations previously considered peripheral. Ibrahim Traoré appears acutely aware of this moment in history. His actions suggest a calculated understanding that the current volatility in global politics can be used to reposition Burkina Faso not as a pawn, but as a sovereign player with its own agenda and capabilities. The launch of the Burkinabe Atomic Energy Agency represents more than an energy project. It symbolizes Burkina Faso's determination to forge its own future, freed from external control. It's a loud refusal to accept the notion that only a handful of nations deserve access to advanced technologies. Traoré is not merely seeking energy security or scientific advancement. He's asserting a new doctrine of African power, dignity, and technological sovereignty. Burkina Faso's move taps into a deeper continental aspiration, the yearning for self-reliance and the end of dependency narratives that have haunted Africa since colonial times. Across Africa, this spirit of self-assertion is growing stronger. Nations are actively investing in their own knowledge systems, industries, and defense capacities. The wave of Pan-Africanism and calls for decolonization is no longer limited to speeches. It's being institutionalized in policy, economics, and now, potentially, nuclear science. Burkina Faso's embrace of atomic energy is not an isolated act, but part of a broader continental awakening. It is a rebuke to the long-standing belief that Africa must wait to be handed progress by the West. Instead, it proclaims that African nations can and will define progress on their own terms. At its core, The nuclear ambitions of Burkina Faso aim not just to gain parity with the rest of the world, but to radically transform what is considered possible for African states. The establishment of the Burkinabe Atomic Energy Agency is both symbolic and practical. It challenges the West's monopoly on nuclear legitimacy and questions the very framework that determines who gets to wield power on the global stage. Through this act, Burkina Faso is rewriting the rules and calling into question the historical exclusions that have long governed access to critical technologies. This bold initiative is likely to ripple across the African continent, sparking interest and potentially inspiring other nations to chart their own course toward technological sovereignty and economic independence. Yet, a lingering question remains: is Burkina Faso's nuclear push merely about energy, or is it a calculated move aimed at recalibrating power dynamics in the region? The launch of the Burkinabe Atomic Energy Agency, not only in Burkina Faso's domestic agenda, but also in the continental mindset. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. To the casual observer, Burkina Faso's drive toward nuclear energy may appear to be a straightforward response to the country's chronic electricity shortages. After all, with less than a quarter of the population enjoying stable access to electricity and frequent power outages crippling productivity, the need for a reliable and long-term energy source is pressing. Nuclear power, with its promise of high output and sustainability, seems to be a logical solution. However, this surface-level interpretation misses the broader context and strategic significance. The establishment of the Burkinabe Atomic Energy Agency is not merely a technocratic endeavor. It is a bold signal of Burkina Faso's desire to reassert its sovereignty and distance itself from the historical patterns of dependency on the West and former colonial powers. In this sense, the Burkinabe Atomic Energy Agency embodies a multidimensional objective. It stands as a declaration of autonomy and an assertion that Burkina Faso will not be constrained by outdated frameworks that have long dictated the limits of African development. Moreover, any pursuit of nuclear capability, even if strictly civilian, inherently touches on matters of national security and geopolitical positioning. The fact that an African country is advancing into nuclear territory is enough to provoke concern in Western capitals. This anxiety does not stem from an imminent threat, but from the uncomfortable reality that the monopoly on high-level technologies, long held by the West, is being challenged. The possibility that Burkina Faso's actions might set a precedent for other African nations is what makes this development particularly disquieting for global power centers. If a landlocked nation with a modest economy and limited infrastructure can take such an ambitious step, then why not others? What's to stop Kenya, Ghana, or Senegal from launching similar initiatives? Should this trend gain momentum, the consequences could be profound. A reconfiguration of global influence, where Africa is no longer a consumer of foreign innovation, but a producer of it. Burkina Faso's embrace of nuclear energy could thus serve as a pivot point, elevating the country from the periphery to a central actor in both regional and international politics. This is precisely what unsettles the traditional power brokers: the notion of an empowered Africa that writes its own rules. That said, Burkina Faso's nuclear journey is not simply an oppositional stance to the West. Rather, it is part of a much larger vision, a new developmental model rooted in self-determination, scientific progress, and political resilience. By moving forward with the creation of the Burkinabe Atomic Energy Agency, Burkina Faso is making it clear that it intends to join the ranks of technologically capable nations, unafraid to contest the established world order if necessary. This effort carries enormous implications, not just for Burkina Faso's place in the world, but for how global systems of technology, power, and diplomacy might be reshaped by emerging nations. Still, such an ambitious path is fraught with challenges. What forms of resistance, might the West deploy to safeguard its dominance in the nuclear sphere? Is Burkina Faso fully equipped, diplomatically, economically, and technically, to navigate the inevitable opposition that may arise? The decision to pursue nuclear energy, especially from a country still developing its foundational infrastructure, is not one made lightly. It involves navigating a complex web of international regulations, high financial costs, and the need for specialized expertise. For Burkina Faso, these obstacles are formidable, yet not insurmountable. One of the most immediate hurdles lies in technical capacity. At present, Burkina Faso lacks the domestic pool of scientists, engineers, and nuclear technicians needed to operate and regulate a nuclear energy program safely and efficiently. Although steps have been taken to build this capacity through training and education, strategic collaborations with countries like Russia, China, North Korea, all of which have extensive experience in nuclear technology, are expected to play a vital role. These alliances are not just transactional. They represent a broader shift toward multipolar cooperation that reflects Africa's desire to choose its partners based on mutual benefit rather than inherited loyalties. One of the most formidable challenges Burkina Faso faces in its nuclear pursuit is the development of a regulatory framework that aligns with global standards. The nuclear sector is, by necessity, one of the most tightly governed industries in the world due to its inherent risks. From the possibility of reactor failures to the complex process of managing radioactive waste. Establishing a credible, transparent, and technically competent oversight body will be essential. This body will need to supervise every phase of nuclear development, from planning and construction to operations and long-term safety. Beyond the technical requirements, this endeavor will also demand unwavering political commitment. The Burkinabe government must demonstrate a readiness to enforce regulations stringently and transparently, regardless of domestic or international pressures. But the technical and regulatory hurdles are just one side of the equation. Burkina Faso must also tread carefully through the intricate geopolitical landscape that accompanies any country's entry into the nuclear domain. The global nuclear order has long been maintained by a small group of powerful nations, with the United States and Europe particularly invested in preserving their dominance. For this reason, even a peaceful civilian nuclear program initiated by an African state is likely to provoke suspicion and resistance. As Burkina Faso continues down this path, it may become the target of political interference, economic sanctions, and subtle forms of international pressure designed to derail its ambitions. Despite these anticipated challenges, the stakes are high, and the potential rewards could be transformative. Reliable access to nuclear-generated electricity would address one of Burkina Faso's most critical developmental gaps. It could help stabilize the country's fragile energy grid, power essential industries, and provide a foundation for modern infrastructure. Over time, this could attract foreign investment, enhance the competitiveness of local industries, and improve the quality of life for millions. But beyond the immediate economic benefits, the move also positions Burkina Faso as a strategic player in regional affairs. With nuclear expertise, the country could influence energy policy, technology partnerships, and even security strategies within West Africa. At the same time, Burkina Faso's nuclear ambition could have a ripple effect across the continent. It challenges the long-standing narrative that Africa must remain technologically dependent on others. By taking initiative in such a high-stakes, high-tech field, Burkina Faso is setting a powerful example, one that could embolden other African countries to take similar leaps. This could mark the beginning of a new era in African innovation, where nations shift from simply consuming imported technology to becoming creators and custodians of advanced systems. In this context, nuclear energy becomes more than a tool for development. It becomes a symbol of sovereignty, resilience, and self-belief. Still, the road ahead is unpredictable. The West, already unnerved by the idea, of losing its grip on nuclear influence, is unlikely to remain passive. Burkina Faso's entry into the nuclear field is likely to prompt skepticism, followed by strategic efforts to contain or redirect the program. These efforts may take many forms, from offers of aid tied to stringent conditions to coordinated diplomatic campaigns designed to question the legitimacy or safety of the project. Western powers may also use international institutions such as the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, to demand more rigorous oversight, framing these actions as safeguards while subtly asserting control. Under such scrutiny, Burkina Faso must navigate a fine line, engaging with global norms while resisting external manipulation. Efforts to limit Burkina Faso's ability to autonomously develop nuclear technology are unlikely to deter President Ibrahim Traoré. His administration has consistently demonstrated a refusal to bend to Western influence, signaling that external pressure will not dictate the direction of national policy. In fact, attempts to constrain or derail Burkina Faso's nuclear ambitions may only reinforce the government's resolve. For Traoré, the pursuit of nuclear energy is not merely about electricity. It is about asserting a vision of complete sovereignty and self-determination. Any obstruction from Western actors will be interpreted not as constructive concern, but as an extension of neocolonial control that Burkina Faso is determined to shake off. Behind the scenes, however, the West may not rely solely on overt diplomatic channels or sanctions. Covert strategies, historically used against countries perceived as stepping beyond their assigned roles in the global hierarchy, could be deployed. These might include disrupting access to critical nuclear technologies, applying pressure on potential allies and suppliers, or sowing internal discord within Burkina Faso through political subversion. These tactics, once used to slow or halt nuclear development in countries like Iran, North Korea, and even South Africa in the past, are not outside the realm of possibility in Burkina Faso's case. Yet, such underhanded moves are likely to backfire, deepening the country's distrust of the West and strengthening the Traoré administration's justification for greater self-reliance. The global response to Burkina Faso's nuclear ambitions is likely to become a litmus test for the true nature of international power dynamics. For decades, nuclear capability has been treated as a kind of sacred privilege reserved for a select few, mostly Western or Western-aligned nations. Any attempt by a non-aligned or African country to enter this domain challenges not just technical conventions, but also the geopolitical architecture of control. If the West chooses to respond with openness, genuine support, and partnership, without attaching strings, it could mark the beginning of a more egalitarian phase in global cooperation. However, if it responds with hostility or obstruction, it risks alienating a continent that is increasingly disillusioned with a world order rooted in post-colonial hierarchies. Amid this uncertainty, expert voices have begun to speculate whether Burkina Faso's nuclear program could eventually evolve beyond civilian energy production. Even the remote suggestion that a previously overlooked African country might be laying the groundwork for nuclear weapons development is profoundly unsettling to Western powers. Such a possibility disrupts decades of assumptions about who is allowed to wield nuclear deterrence and who must remain perpetually vulnerable. To many in Western capitals, the mere thought of an African nuclear power, especially one as politically defiant as Burkina Faso, feels like a radical departure from the existing global status quo. But speculation alone does not constitute evidence. It is essential to explore the strategic logic that might be guiding Burkina Faso's ambitions. In today's world, nuclear weapons, for better or worse, are seen by many as the ultimate security guarantee. Given the geopolitical volatility in West Africa, as well as Burkina Faso's repeated exposure to internal insurgencies and external interference, it would not be irrational for its leaders to consider all available tools for securing national sovereignty. Establishing the Burkina Atomic Energy Agency could serve as a dual-purpose strategy, one that prioritizes peaceful nuclear energy development while quietly building the scientific and infrastructural capacity that could, in theory, support a future weapons program. Such a path, if pursued, would represent a seismic shift not only for Burkina Faso, but for the entire African continent. Since the signing of the Treaty of Pelindaba, which declared Africa a nuclear weapon-free zone, the continent has taken pride in promoting peace and non-proliferation. The emergence of a nuclear-armed African state, even one acting in its own defense, would challenge the foundational principles that have underpinned African diplomacy for decades. But it would also reflect a new strategic calculus shaped by changing global realities, including the rise of multipolarism and the erosion of Western credibility in the global South. If Burkina Faso were to pursue nuclear weapons, the repercussions would be both profound and paradoxical. On one hand, the possession of such weapons could serve as a powerful deterrent against foreign aggression. It would radically alter the calculus of military intervention, making it significantly riskier for any state or coalition to threaten Burkina Faso's sovereignty. Such a development might even contribute to greater regional stability by discouraging meddling from larger powers. On the other hand, the very act of developing nuclear weapons could provoke a firestorm of opposition, leading to diplomatic isolation or even punitive actions from global institutions. As with all nations navigating the nuclear threshold, Burkina Faso would face a delicate balancing act between asserting its independence and managing the risks of international fallout. Yet suspicion continues to shadow Burkina Faso's ambitions, and the West's mistrust reveals a far deeper anxiety: the fear that Africa is no longer willing to stay in its assigned place within the global hierarchy. What Burkina Faso symbolizes is not just national ambition, but continental assertion. The strategic rationale for even considering the pursuit of nuclear weapons lies in this broader context. In a world where power often overrides principle, and where military might can silence diplomacy, nuclear weapons are viewed as the ultimate equalizer. For a nation like Burkina Faso, historically vulnerable to foreign interference and regional instability, acquiring such power could be seen as a way to level the playing field, ensuring that its voice resonates on the international stage, no longer overshadowed by more powerful states. In this light, the possibility of Burkina Faso seeking nuclear weapons might not simply be about national defense. It could represent an effort to disrupt the current global order, one long maintained by Western control over advanced technologies, particularly nuclear. If an African nation were to step into this realm, it would challenge the idea that cutting-edge innovation and global authority are the exclusive domain of the West. This could mark the emergence of a more multipolar world, where Africa asserts greater influence and demands a seat at the table, not as a passive recipient of aid or instruction, but as an equal partner. It forces the international community to confront long-held assumptions that Africa must remain technologically dependent, geopolitically marginal, and perpetually deferential. Instead, Burkina Faso's atomic ambitions, whether peaceful or not, send a loud and clear message. The era of African submission is over. This signals a turning point. The question now is not just about Burkina Faso, but about how the rest of the world, especially the West, chooses to respond. Will Western powers cling to old patterns of dominance, using pressure and conditionality to try to keep Africa in check? Or will they recognize the changing tides and pursue a new kind of engagement, one based on respect, mutual benefit, and shared progress? Do you believe that the West's approach to Africa will change in light of these bold moves? Are we finally on the brink of a truly win-win collaboration? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more insightful content like this.